Hello, everyone. My name is Ayman. I'm the podcast lead at Liverpool Global Relief. Today, I'm joined by Michael Lavalette. He is a British-born academic specializing in social work, but is more widely known for being an unrelenting political advocate and activist. He is an internationally recognized academic, emeritus professor at Liverpool Hope University and a visiting professor at the University of Bethlehem. And he is also a visiting professor at the University of West Attica, based in Athens. In March 2021, he was awarded an honorary membership of the Palestinian Writers Union in recognition of his writing on and activism with Palestinian groups in Britain and the West Bank. He is the author, joint author, or editor of 30 books and pamphlets. I assume it's more now, is it?
Yeah, slightly more.
More than that. Okay, so an extremely well-established academic and political advocate is joining us today. He currently holds the seat as an independent councillor for Lancashire County Council, winning Preston Central East from Labour. In summer 2025, he joined Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana's Your Party, along with fellow Lancashire County councillors Almas Razakazi and Yusuf Matala. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to tell me more about yourself and why you sort of decided to get into politics?
Okay, so I wouldn't describe myself as a politician. By job, was an academic. I'm retired. I retired about 18 months ago. But I was an academic working at the University of Central Lancashire in Preston, University of Aberdeen, University of Liverpool for about 13 years, and then Liverpool Hope University for 15 years. And my field of specialism was sociology, social policy, social work. As an academic, I wrote and researched questions of poverty, inequality, and increasingly global aspects of that as well. So I wrote about and did some research on the Palestinian West Bank and Beirut and Lebanon and published around those things. So on the one hand, I'm an academic, but I was an academic who always, it sounds a bit grand, but I saw myself as, I suppose, as a public intellectual. That for me, the point of doing the research and writing in the university is to try and provoke debate or bring about change in the real world for the betterment of the vast majority. So I saw my academic work very political in that sense, with a small p. And at the same time, I was involved and have been involved all my life in various campaigns. So anti-racist campaigns. I was the chair of Preston Stop the War in 2001 when the war in Afghanistan and then Iraq started. And it was really through my role as the chair of Preston Stop the War Coalition that I stumbled into being an elected politician, because 2003, there was the biggest demonstration in British history, February 2003. From Preston, we organised 6 coaches and a train that went to London, which is the biggest turnout that Preston's ever sent to London. It's 5.5 hours each way in the coach to London for a demonstration. It's a long way. So 6 coaches and a train. But on the way back, it was clear that Tony Blair was still going to go to war with Iraq, despite the fact that almost 2 million people had marched through the streets. So there was a bit of debate on our train on the way home, and people were saying, well, look, why don't we stand in the local elections in May, and you should do it, Michael? And I was like, oh, God, there's no way I want to be a councillor. So anyway, there was a lot of back and forth, and I only agreed to stand if I stood in Labour's safest seat in Preston, because I thought, well, we won't win that, but if we can get second, we can say the anti-war case is strong in the area. Anyway, it came to pass that on election day, I won that seat from Labour. And so my life took a different tack, if you like. Yeah. So as well as being an academic, I was also a councillor. So I was a Preston City councillor for 14 years. Is that right? Yeah. And then I finished with that, and that to me felt a long time doing it. And I stopped. So I stopped. I was first elected in 2003. Round about 2017, I think I finished, and I wasn't going to do that anymore. But what changed was the genocide in Gaza. I was in Preston, the key organiser of the demonstrations a couple of colleagues at the Q organised demonstrations in Preston. We had regular meetings. We organised coaches to 32 demonstrations. I've spoken at lots of meetings across the Northwest. And then it came to the general election last year. People said, well, we should stand a pro-Gaza candidate and you should be it, Michael. So okay, I eventually agreed. I just retired. I actually retired from work on the Thursday and was elected to be our prospective parliamentary candidate on the Sunday. So I had 3 days of retirement, I think. And we actually got second. So we took Labour in this. It's a very safe Labour seat. And when I first came to Preston, their majority was 25,000. Well, we got that down to 5,000 at the general election, and I was second. And that takes a logic of its own, because we had almost 9,000 voters. And then people saying, well, you can't abandon them. So when it comes to the county council elections this year, myself and Almas and Yusuf all stood. We stood four independent, but locally they're called the pro-Gaza independents. But it's more, we're anti-austerity, we're pro-welfare services, we're welfare, not warfare. But of course, we are for an end to the genocide and etc. in Palestine. Yeah. And we stood 4 candidates and we won 3 of them. So I'm back being a councillor again. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but academic and by default elected politician, really.
Yeah. So I noticed when I was doing a bit of research about you, there's a lot of underlying themes of socialism that comes into how you operate as a councillor and as an academic. Do you believe, there's a lot of criticism of socialism in the press, in Western media. How do you believe that there is a future for socialism? Would you describe yourself as a socialist fundamentally? And if so, do you believe that there is a future for socialism in British politics, given the fact that the media, for example, treated Corbyn so terribly? What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, I would describe myself as a socialist, though I do think amongst the sort of younger generation, there is amongst many people, but especially a younger generation, there's maybe a confusion over what socialism is. You're absolutely right. It gets a terrible press. That's not surprising, because the press and the media run their organisations in the interest of the powerful.
And they are fundamentally capitalist.
Yeah, anything that threatens them, they're not going to take kindly to. So what do I mean by socialism? So, I would break that down into various different things. And I actually think that when you do it that way, socialism is very, very popular. So, for example, from the late 1970s onwards in Britain, we have privatised all our sort of services, our main utilities. Water was privatised, gas, electricity, the railways, for example, and more than that. The consequence of that is that the shareholders, the top shareholders in those formerly nationalised utilities since the 1980s have taken £192 billion out of the system as share dividends. Yet at the same time, we know that the waterways are a disaster zone. We pour, excuse my language, but we pour shit into rivers and seas and waterways. There are constant leaks. They haven't put any money into the infrastructure. They have just used that as a source of self-enrichment. The same with the railways. We have the most expensive railway system in Europe. It's not a socialist country, but my daughter lives in Australia. And when I went to Australia, myself and my wife went to meet some cousins, some second cousins, and they were in Newcastle and we were in Sydney. That's the equivalent of going from Liverpool to London. We had to get on our daily cards, we got a boat from Manly to Sydney, the underground from that Sydney Harbour to the train station. We got on a train and went from Sydney to Newcastle, Liverpool to London.
Yeah.
And then we did the reverse and came all the way back. It cost us $12 each.
Wow.
Is it right?
Yeah.
Because moving people around, getting them to work, these should be services that are provided in the interest of people. We keep that would keep cars off the road, all those things. But yet, how much would that journey cost in Britain for two people, it would be astronomical. Now, Australia's not a socialist country, but they have got a priority on public transport. Same with Luxembourg. Luxembourg is not a socialist country, but public transport is free. But in Britain, this is a way for rich individuals to fleece the public and get even richer. It's the same with gas and electricity and etc. etc. So, on the one hand, socialism is about bringing those utilities, those natural monopolies, back into public ownership with profits poured back into the system for the benefit of all. All of those are incredibly popular in the polls. Most people in Britain want waters to be renationalised, want the rail to be renationalised, want gas and electricity to be renationalised. It's not that socialism's unpopular. When you explain it in terms of what we mean, people are in favour of that. Socialism is for greater freedom for all of us. So the far right at the moment say that they're the defenders of free speech. I actually think socialists are the defenders of free speech, because those at the very top have a huge amount of free speech. They have the papers, they have the television stations. It's us that find ourselves constantly harassed for the things that we say. If you stand up today in the middle of Liverpool and you get a piece of cardboard and you write on that cardboard, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action, that phrase will get you arrested and you'll face terror charges.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm for the greatest amount of freedom of speech, freedom of mobilisation, and socialists are always for freedom of speech, freedom of mobilisation. And of course, we're for redistribution and equality. We shouldn't live in Britain. Britain today, the top 50 wealthiest people have combined wealth of £450 billion. That's what Britain spends in total on our health, education and pension budgets. And that's just 50 families. That's more than the bottom 55% of the population have combined. We live in one of the most unequal societies in Europe, and we need to introduce wealth tax and redistributive taxation so that the very wealthy pay their share and provide the services that we desperately need and address the cost of living crisis. Those are the building blocks of what I would call socialism and redistribution and the starting point for a better world. And I think it's possible. I think it's possible if we get our side right.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that the top 50 families, just only 50 families own £450 billion, I think it was the figure that you mentioned, which is our national budget in and of itself. And you believe that should be changed essentially to be put back into the hands of public ownership, to be reinvested into public funds. So just to play the devil's advocate here, I'm not supporting the 50 families quota. If it were that easy to essentially reverse that, why don't you think politicians have done it yet? Especially given that we have a so-called left-wing prime minister in the government right now who has previously supported such socialist policies. Why do you believe that? You know, as soon as he's gone into government, he changes up so quickly, and he refuses to essentially reverse the change that he promised to reverse. If it were so easy, why don't politicians do it?
So a couple of things. First of all, I don't think that Keir Starmer did promise to make fundamental change before he came to power. And the reason he's got such a big majority is not because people rushed out in their hundreds of thousands with excitement to vote for a Starmer government. Actually, Keir Starmer's government have got a huge majority because the Tory party collapsed at the last election. But his vote was actually lower than the Labour vote when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, both in 2017 and in 2019. So, you know, it's not that. Why do I think this? So, look, you have to go back a little bit in time. So I sometimes start these things forgetting that many of your viewers will see this as ancient history. But you have to go back to 1979 and the election of Margaret Thatcher in Britain, and then the following year, Ronald Reagan in America, and the impact that those two had in terms of reshaping, you know, in a small number of countries, first America, Britain, Canada, Australia, but gradually reframing the sort of dominant economics in
a neoliberal fashion.
Yeah. Away from Keynesian state-directed management of the economy towards neoliberalism. And that's become the new common sense of the political parties. It was never the common sense of ordinary people. Throughout this time, ordinary people have wanted more spending on welfare, more spending on healthcare, better education for our kids. We think that the rich should pay more in taxation rather than less. If you look at British social attitudes, they've been fairly consistent for the last 40 years that majority opinion is in favour of those things. But political opinion was, you can't do any of that anymore. We can't control capital. Capital can go anywhere in the world. So all we have to do, because of these powerful multinationals, is that we have to make the conditions right to attract them. And that means we have to be a low taxation economy, low welfare spending economy, cheap labour economy. And that's been the sort of logic of Labour and Tory governments from 1979 onwards. And part of that was privatisation is better than state provision, so we should sell them off. We should try and invite private companies in to welfare providers wherever possible. And the consequence of that is that over that 40-year period, the inequality gap in Britain has got bigger and bigger and bigger. We're back to Victorian levels of inequality in this country. Whereas between 1945 and 1979, there was still inequality. The rich still had fabulous wealth compared to ordinary people, but the inequality gap was much smaller and they were taxed heavier. There was provision of those public services. So 45 to 79 wasn't for me, some sort of socialist nirvana, but it shows that it's possible to introduce reforms and pay reforms. Since 1979, there's been a move away from those things amongst the main parties. So I actually don't think that the Tory party, the Labour Party and the Tory Lib Dems, when they were a coalition together, I don't think there has been that significant a change in state approaches to welfare and the economy and to inequality, no matter which of the three main parties are in power. They're all, in that sense, tied into a notion that inequality is good. You can't tax the rich, and that privatisation is better than state provision. I don't believe any of that.
Yeah. So why do you believe that the sort of overarching political consensus in this country is that, privatization is better than state ownership, whereas, as you mentioned before, the vast majority of people don't believe in that notion. They believe in the opposite. Why do you believe it is that, the British people aren't stupid? They want greater equality, but why is it that that notion has completely overarched every single other principle of equality that Britain essentially, well, I wouldn't say used to stand for, but there is more of a desire for equality, but the complete opposite notion has sort of, infected British thinking. Why is that the case?
Well, I think, it is the sort of political common. It has become the political common sense, and it's also reflected in the main idea formers, if you like, all the newspapers, all BBC, ITV, Sky. They all start with a set of assumptions that the way in which we work, that you have to be fiscally prudent. So the present Chancellor, before she came into power, said that we will be sticking to our own fiscal rules. Well, what that's meant is that we are entering a renewed period of austerity. What that means is that for ordinary people, life is increasingly difficult, and she's battered herself into a corner where, to prove to the markets, I'm never quite sure what we mean. We treat these as if they were big, self-conscious individuals. The markets are nothing like that. They're just the wealthy people gambling on our futures, really. But to keep the markets safe, to try and secure, to make sure that the markets are supportive of a Labour government, she's quite prepared to cut winter fuel allowance last year, to refuse to remove a two-child cap on benefits, to cut disability benefits, and to stand over a system where at present, food prices in this country in the last 5 years have increased by 33%, and fuel prices have increased by 40% over the same period. There's nobody who's had a wage rise, anything close to that, which means that all of us are harder up this year than we were last year than we were the year before, And all of us are struggling to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to pay the bills. And for many people, it means that the choice is to heat or to feed their kids. And, you know, we're the sixth richest country in the world. But most people don't believe that because they can't believe that we can be the sixth richest country in the world, yet I can't feed my kids at the end of the month, or I'm struggling to feed the kids at the end of the month. And every day in this country, over 1 million children go to bed hungry. That's a disgrace.
Yeah. So thank you for your thoughts on that. Just moving on to your more international work. So you led a delegation of 34 people from Preston to the West Bank. You were the last ever international group to ever meet Yasser Arafat. Just tell me a bit more about that. I mean, it's quite a unique experience to have had. What was the purpose of the delegation, and what were you hoping to achieve out of it?
Okay, so that was back in 2004, and since then I've actually taken quite a lot of delegations, usually student delegations, back and forward to the West Bank. But the first one, you're right, the first delegation I led was in 2004, and there was 34 of us, I think, from Preston that went to the West Bank, and yeah, we were the last people to meet Arafat. What happened was to take you back to 2003 when I was first elected. So I had no intention of being a councillor. I didn't think I would get elected. Thought I'd get second, but then on election day I suddenly become the councillor for Central Preston, and I'm then faced with a dilemma. Well, I'm an anti-war activist. How can I bring that into the council chamber? So we had a meeting, and what we decided was that all the way through 2001, 2002, 2003, the Stop the War movement grew just after the attack on the Twin Towers, because we knew that America was going to go to war, and that they were launching this war on terror, and we knew that that would have consequences for the people of the Middle East, and we knew that it would have consequences for the Muslim population in the West as well. So Stop the War was really Stop the War on Terror. And so we started to march. We marched against the war in Afghanistan, and when we did that, the slogan was Stop the War in Afghanistan, Freedom for Palestine. And then, you know, it was Iraq, so it was troops out of Afghanistan, don't attack Iraq, freedom for Palestine. So throughout that whole period, freedom for Palestine was one of the key slogans of the Stop the War movement. And so we decided that the way that we could bring our anti-war activity into the council was to try and twin Preston with a city on the West Bank. So Preston claims to be the third city of the Northwest. I'm not from Preston. I think that's a hard one to argue. I'm sure Warrington and Bolton would have dispute, but they say it's Manchester, Liverpool, then Preston. So that's Preston's claim. So I looked at the West Bank, and the third city of the West Bank was Nablus. So we then said that we should, as the third city of the Northwest, we should twin with the third city of the West Bank. And I said that I was going to bring a motion to twin Preston with Nablus to Preston City Council. And when I announced that, there was only 3 other councillors that said they were going to vote with me. So we were going to get an absolute battering.
Yeah.
But actually, it sparked quite a lot of interest. So in the local paper, they gave me a full double spread to write about why I thought this was the right thing to do. And then the following day, they got a journalist from the Jewish Chronicle to write a full 2 pages saying why this is a scandal and Michael Lavalette should be cast asunder and never spoke to again. And then for the next 5 weeks until the vote took place, there was lots of debates. The letters page in the paper was full of I'm for twinning, I'm against twinning, this is a good thing, this is a disaster. We also had 2 really big meetings in Preston of 500 people turned up at 2 meetings when national speakers came along. And as a consequence of that, I appeared on Radio 4 Today programme and on Newsnight because nobody had twinned. It was something that the anti-apartheid movement had done. That's where I got the idea from. But that was in the 70s and the 80s. It hadn't been done for such a long time. And why Palestine? Anyway, we went to the council vote and we lost the vote by 3. So we got, it was 21 to 18, I think, on the day. So, you know, we increased from 3 to 18, but we lost. So Preston's not twinned with Nablus. And I thought, well, that's that. We've done a bit. But what I didn't realise was, as it had been picked up by The Guardian and Newsnight and Radio 4, it had also been picked up by the press in the Middle East. So the main Palestinian paper is called Al-Quds, and the Al-Quds newspaper had reported this story. As a consequence of that, the international section of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah wrote to me a couple of days after the vote and said, we've been following this in the press, and we would like to invite you to come to Palestine. We'll pay for you to come over. We'll take you around and you can see for yourself what's happening in Palestine. And then it's up for you. You draw your own conclusions, and we just ask that you go back and tell what you're seeing. And it's up to you to report that in whatever way you want. So I wrote back and said, look, I'd love to come to Palestine. I've been involved in Palestine solidarity work since 1982, so I'd love to come. I said, the second thing is I'm going to pay myself, because if you pay for me, that will just be the story. So I'll pay for myself to come. And do you mind if I bring a few people with me? And so I got this email back saying, very fancy email from the president's office saying that the presidential office will be delighted to welcome the Preston delegation. Oh my God, it sounds really official. And I think they probably thought it was going to be 3 or 4 of us, and we would be like the mayor or this and that. But there was 34 of us. There should have been 35. Somebody passed away just before going. So 34 of us. We had 2 imams. We had a Church of England vicar. We had 2 women who were in full niqab. 7 women who had hijab. We had Muslim women without any head covering. We had 3 regional trade union officers. We had students and a school student with us. We were black, white, Asian, Muslim, Christian, people of no faith. And actually, the Palestinians weren't used to that, because normally they had trade union delegations or political party delegations or religious delegations, and they couldn't believe that we were all together. It kind of blew their mind a little bit that we were all getting on, and in a sense that reflected what the anti-war movement is all about, really.
Yeah.
And so in 2004, for the first time, we went, and as part of that, we met President Arafat. At the time, he was still living in the Moqata. The Israelis, this was still during the Second Intifada, so the Israelis, there was constant incursions across the West Bank. We had to be smuggled. So 34 people being smuggled across the West Bank at different points. It was all rather surreal. And then we were taken down into the bunker where Arafat was protected and in hiding, and we met him and had a chat with him, got a photograph taken with him, and 6 weeks later he'd been murdered.
Yeah. So you've been very active in the cause of in the Palestinian cause. The British government recently recognized the state of Palestine. I believe that it's simply a political stunt that provides virtually no practical benefit. But what do you think on the matter? How should the British government, show itself to be genuine in helping the people of Palestine? Because it's not just simply a political matter and, oh, I recognize this state, that means that we support you, or that we are, against genocide. It's about helping Palestinian children, women and children eat and help them to feel safe at night. But the British government isn't doing that. What can they do to essentially, to stop that, to reverse that, and to actually help the people of Palestine?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start off if I can, if I've got time. Let me take a step back and try and draw a more positive picture, and then address exactly the questions that you were talking about. You see, I first was involved in Palestine solidarity work in 1982. I was a student at Glasgow University, and in the summer of 1982, the Israelis invaded Lebanon, and for 64 days there was a siege of Beirut, and the conditions were terrible. But the Israelis couldn't get any further. They were fought to a standstill by the various Palestinian factions. And at the end of that, the Americans came in and negotiated a peace deal. And that peace deal said that the Palestinian fighters would leave Beirut, that the Americans would guarantee the safety of the Palestinians in that city, and the fighting would stop. And the Palestinians agreed to that. Whether they were right to do so or not is a different question, but the Palestinians agreed to that. And ships came into Beirut harbour, and all the Palestinian fighters got on the ships and were dispersed across North Africa and the Middle East. And the Palestinian refugee camps in Beirut were left unprotected, but the Americans guaranteed their safety. As soon as those ships sailed away, the Israelis, with their proxy forces in Lebanon, who were the fascist organisation, the Phalange, entered the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila and slaughtered the men, women and children of those camps. It was absolutely brutal what they did to unarmed civilians. And we were watching all this on the news, and what we did was, when we, at the end of the summer holidays, when we went back to university, we twinned Glasgow University with Birzeit University in Ramallah, and we're the first university to do that at the time. Now, when I was involved in that campaign, we were a tiny minority of people in Britain that supported the Palestinians. If I give you the example, my mum and dad were, they would be slightly more right-wing than me, but they would be traditional Labour voters. We would agree on most things, but they were shocked that I was supporting the Palestinians. The dominant ideas in Britain in the 1980s were still a sort of hangover from the war, the horror of the Holocaust. You had to be supportive of Israel for those reasons. Since the turn of this century, the picture in Britain has completely changed, to the point that the vast majority of Britons now support Palestine, support the rights of Palestinians, support an immediate ceasefire in the war on Gaza, support the isolation of the state of Israel. That's happening not just in Britain, but right around the world. So one of the things I want to say is that over the years, the campaigns that we've been involved in has really shifted popular consciousness on the Palestine question in a really fundamental way, right? It's almost the polar opposite of what it was 40 years ago, and we've done that in the last 20 years. If we look at the last 2 years, the government, whether that is the Conservative government or the Labour government of Starmer, have both tied themselves to Israel and to the genocidal state and their activities to protect Israel, but they have been completely out of sync with ordinary people. From early on, the majority were against the genocide and wanted Britain to stop selling arms to Israel, and they were out of sync with that. And at various different points, the government have tried to go head-to-head with the mass movement. So if you remember, Suella Braverman said, these people won't march on the weekend of Remembrance 2023. And we said, we're marching. And she said, you're not. And we said, we're marching. And the consequence was we marched and she lost her job. So at key points, the government has tried to take on the Palestine movement, and we've won.
Yeah.
They've tried to criminalise us in all sorts of ways. They talk about our marches being hate marches. There's no arrests on them. The arrests that have been arrests recently, and they are old people writing bits of paper around Palestine action, and they've been arrested, and they say, oh, okay, but they're not violent. They are demonstrations about horrific events, but they're actually quite joyous events. They're really friendly family demonstrations, and they're massive. To have repeatedly hundreds of thousands of people on the streets in London is quite massive. You know, when I was younger, if you got 100,000 people to a march in London, you thought, goodness, the world's changing. If we got 100,000, we'd be disappointed because that would be small. So, you know, the reason I'm saying that is because I think this has created a problem for the government, and it's a problem for Labour. I think Labour lost seats at the last general election. I think it's causing them all sorts of political problems, and yet they're tied to Israel. So the recognition of the state of Palestine was them trying to gain some of that some of that hold back to try and say that we actually are pro-Palestinians. They're not. What was interesting, of course, was that they also used it as a bargaining chip with the Israelis. If you don't stop doing the genocide, if you don't stop some aspects of this, we're going to recognise the state of Palestine. Well, I'm sorry. Palestinian statehood isn't dependent on what Israel does. It's a right. The Palestinians
Yeah.
have the right to
Yeah.
a state, and
It's
it's
actually
not dependent
offensive
on.
to see it as a bargaining chip.
Absolutely, it's not a
Yeah.
bargaining chip, and you should never have done that. But I
Yeah.
think the reason that they did that was because of the pressure of the pro-Palestine movement globally and in Britain in particular. Does that recognition change anything? Well, it's not changing anything in Stammer's government's position. They continue to fly spy missions from the RAF base in Cyprus. They continue to supply the arms that Israel and the components for the arms and the military machine in Israel. We continue to defend Israel to the hilt in the United Nations. That needs to fundamentally change. We need to boycott, disinvest from Israel. That's something that we can do, but it's something that we should be demanding of local government pension schemes, universities, and of the British state. We should be demanding that Israel is kicked out of UEFA and FIFA. We should be demanding that Israel is not allowed to take part in the Eurovision Song Contest and the various other things. We should isolate Israel as a genocidal apartheid state in the same way that the South African apartheid state was isolated during the years of apartheid. And while it's good that we have now recognised the Palestinian state, we should make clear, in my opinion, that what we mean by that is a single Palestinian state that runs from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean, within those boundaries, all people have full equal rights, no matter what religion or ethnic background they have. So it's a world of equality, of equal access to law, of justice for all on the same terms, from the river to the sea.
If the popular opinion around Palestine is to support the Palestinian people and oppose Israel, why haven't the government already isolated the state of Israel? Why does it continue to support the state of Israel on an international stage and essentially isolate itself from its own people and from the consensus of the United Nations? Is it that, you know, the interests of a small group of people, pro-Zionists, you know, completely outweighs the population of Great Britain and essentially the population of the world?
So I don't. I know there's all sorts of debates about, you know, what's sometimes called the Zionist lobby, and I don't particularly like using that phrase. I think there is a Zionist lobby. There are all sorts of lobbies, especially in America. I mean, the system is based on lobbying, and you have pressure groups and lobbies and how they work. And of course, there are interest groups that try to promote with governments their own particular interests around whatever. But I don't think that's the reason why Britain and America support the state of Israel. And I actually think the reason that Israel is supported by the Western imperial powers is because of its historic and strategic role in the Middle East. And that is that, you know, when Israel was formed, it was formed with the backing of the sort of Western powers. But so let me put it this way: in the 1950s, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which is the sort of Israeli equivalent of the Guardian. So Haaretz said that Israel will survive as long as it can become a watchdog state for Western interests. That was quite an interesting phrase, a watchdog state. What do they mean? And effectively what they were saying was, look, we'll be armed by the West and we will be the West's outlier in the Middle East. This is a key part of the world. There's oil resources. It's strategically important. At that time, there was the Cold War, but it remains strategically important in the American attempts to isolate China and Russia. So the Middle East is geographically, geopolitically, economically a very important region of the world, and therefore you must secure it for Western interests. So you can either do that by having a permanent British or American presence in the world, but after the Second World War that was difficult, and they sort of changed, you know, the sort of empire. The old British Empire was breaking down and independence, and so there had to be new ways of forming those relationships. And so Israel was basically armed to the teeth, and its job was to promote and protect Western interests in that part of the world. Now, obviously, it has its own interests in that part of the world, its own sub-imperial interests, but it's primarily there as a watchdog for Western interests. So what does that mean? Let me give you a concrete example. So in 2003, Britain and America go into Iraq, and within a few weeks, America claims victory in Iraq. And of course, that's not true, right? They then find themselves in a long, drawn-out, battle with various different forces right across Iraq. And in Iraq, there's a Sadr city, which was really problematic. The Americans couldn't control Sadr city at all. It was under the control of the Shia militias. And by 2006, there was lots of talk in Western military circles and in the Western press about what was called the problem of the Shia crescent. And basically what the Shia crescent was, they said that it starts off in Iran, it goes through Iraq, through Sadr city, and it ends up at the point of the crescent is in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And these are problematic to Western interests. And we have to deal with the Shia crescent. We have to deal with Iran. America had wanted to deal with Iran since 1979, so we have to deal with Iran. We have to deal with the Shia militias in Iraq, and we have to deal with Hezbollah. The problem for the Americans was that they were already in Afghanistan and not doing particularly well, and they were in Iraq and not doing particularly well, and therefore the thought of starting a third war against the Shias in the region was seen to be unproblematic. Was seen to be problematic. And under those conditions, they unleashed their watchdog state. So what does Israel do? Israel then launches a war into Lebanon to address the problem of Hezbollah. Okay, in America's interest, but also in their own interest, because this allows Israel to talk about extending the borders of Israel into Lebanon, dealing with Hezbollah. Hezbollah's their historic. So it's in Israel's interest, but it's also in the interest of Western imperialism at that point. And that was what the outcome was going to be. The problem, of course, was that for the first time, really, Hezbollah beat Israel in that war in 2006. And then that started a dynamic where, well, what's the point of giving all this money to a watchdog state if the watchdog state can't deal with
itself,
with the problems round about? And I think that one of the consequences of that was the repeated attacks on Hamas in Gaza, of Israel showing that we're still dominant, we can still deal with the problems we're dealing with. And it was Gaza that bore the brunt of their failure to deal with Hezbollah in 2006, because that war took place in 2006. 2006, there was also the elections in the Palestinian state, and Hamas took control of Gaza at that point. And in a strange way, Hamas were the enemy of Israel, of course, but they were also the sort of proxy of, look, we're still dominant, look, here's our weapons, we can. And so those regular attacks that you get on Gaza as a way of Israel showing their new weapons, showing their strength to the Americans primarily, that we are still a reliable watchdog in this region. So that's why I think Britain and America support Israel. It's not the Zionist lobby, it's because the Israeli state is the pro-Western, and it's the Western proxy in the Middle East. And a strong assertive Israel is what Israel wants, but it's also in the interest of Britain and American imperialism to, push Iran back, to push the various Sunni groups back, the various militias and any competitor states, to make it safe for the interests, the political interests, the military interests, and the economic interests of the West.
Yeah. Arguably, I'm just thinking, why couldn't they do that with, states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, who are also inclined to taking in Western interests? Why did it have to be specifically Israel?
So I think historically it was Israel, but I think the point that you make is quite interesting, because I think that's one of the problems that Israel presently has. So after 2006, when Israel was vulnerable to Hezbollah, the Americans and the British started to develop their relationship with Saudi Arabia, started to arm Saudi Arabia, their war in the Yemen, because the biggest problem for them was Iran. So if Israel wasn't going to be the force to stop Iran or the threat of Iran, could Saudi Arabia do it? So that then unleashed some local wars between, or tensions. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, UAE, all wanting to be the dominant power in the region, and the West try to work out which one of these would make it safest for them. And if you look at the Abraham Accords and you look at what Trump's talking about now and the role of AI, there is a shift. And that's a problem for Israel. There is a shift in some parts of the American state to say that we should move towards closer relationships with some of the emirate states. We should move to have a closer relationship with Saudi. And the Abraham Accords is about making some sort of historic agreement which will keep Israel in place. Saudi will be there and will make it safe for Western interests. Of course, as they continue their genocide in Gaza, there's no way that Saudi can come to some historic agreement with Israel. Well, they might be able to, but it would cause such huge discontent amongst the Arab peoples if they were in the short term to make a deal with Israel while the killing in Gaza was going on. So I think those are some of the problems that Israel has at the present time, the way that America is actively looking at some of the other states in the region and whether their interests would be better served by having closer ties with them alongside Israel. They're not talking about dumping Israel, but Israel, suddenly finding that there are other Arab states who have the ear of America as much as Israel does.
In our communities, we already believe there's a big sort of consensus around these Arab states. A lot of people say already that the Arab states are essentially, they are already working closely with the Western allies and Israel against the Palestinian people, and there's already a lot of discontent. And why do you believe that these Arab states can't defend their Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine? Is it as a result of protecting their own political interests more broadly?
Yeah, so the cause of Palestine amongst the Arab peoples is hugely popular, but the Arab governments, the Arab states, have uniformly, throughout the decades, been hopeless, really, in any sort of support for the Palestinian movement. The Palestinian writer, theorist, artist, Ghassan Kanafani, he said that the Palestinian people have got several enemies. He said that they have the enemy of Western imperialism, so British and American imperialism is an enemy of the Palestinian people. There's the enemy of Zionism, right, and its ties with there. Those two are obvious. But the third big enemy of the Palestinian people, he said, was the Arab elites, both in Palestine and in the neighbouring states, because they always put their own interests, just as we started off earlier on. The interests of the ruling elite in Britain and ordinary people in Britain are not the same. They want, to increase their fabulously wealthy lifestyles even more, and we just want to put food on the table. Those two things clash. It's the same right across the Arab world. And the biggest recipient of military aid in the world is Israel. But we should always remember that the second biggest recipient of American military aid in the world is Egypt.
Yeah. Just as a final question to you, it seems to be that states are trying to balance neutrality with moral responsibility, arguably shunning moral responsibility more so than neutrality. How do you believe the United Nations should be reformed? It's a very, very big question, and there are a lot of challenges with it. What are the next steps that, for example, the next generation can take to ensure that justice is genuinely seen, felt, and heard across the world, rather than it being merely spoken on the world stage with no practical action behind it?
Okay, so I'm going to say something that probably people might find initially controversial, but I don't think the UN can be reformed, and I think the UN, in a sense, should be abolished. Of course, I'm all for food redistribution programs and all those kind of things. The reason I say that is because when people think about the UN, they think it's the United Nations. Every country in the world can join. It provides a forum for discussion and debate. Yeah, but it's completely hierarchical. It was created after the Second World War to replace the League of Nations, and in that there is there's like the three levels, isn't there? So there's every country in the world can join the United Nations if they so wish, right? That's one that gets you in the General Assembly. Fantastic. Anything that's passed at the General Assembly of the United Nations has passed over the years motion after motion after motion condemning what Israel does in Palestine and supporting Palestinian liberation. Overwhelmingly, the majority of the countries in the world support those things. It's passed at UN General Assemblies. But the UN General Assemblies then have the Security Council, and the Security Council is the one that has to sign that off. And the Security Council is only a subset of all the nations. So, and some of them get there by turn or by voting or whatever. But within the Security Council, there are what's called the Permanent Five. So these 5 countries are permanently on the Security Council, and each one of them has a veto. Okay.
Yeah.
So who are they? Britain, France,
US.
Russia, US, China. Right. My God. Right. These are the countries that have got a terrible human rights record. These are the main imperial powers. And frankly, they just roll out anything that they don't like. So all those motions that have been pro-Palestine, the Americans have always used a veto against any motion that is critical of Israel. And Britain usually does. So until the Permanent Five are removed, until and that won't happen, because that's the purpose of the UN, is to enshrine the power of the most powerful imperial states at the end of the Second World War in that forum. Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. You have been amazing. Really, really insightful discussion. Hopefully, I wish you the best in your political career. I'm currently an undergraduate law student at the University of Liverpool. So wish me luck with I want to be a barrister, and hopefully in the future I want to get into politics like you as well. But thank you so much for your time. Honestly, it was an amazing discussion.
Right. Thanks very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Maybe in the future as well, if you'd like to come back on, maybe in a couple months' time, just to give us an update about, contemporary issues at that time, we'd really be delighted to have you on again.
Okay, anytime. Yeah, just drop me a line.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael.